I remember the cold before I remember any face. The stone floor of Kaer Morhen, the smell of iron, the echo of wind slipping through cracked walls. These things shaped me before any master ever spoke my name. When Vesemir carried me into the keep, I was nothing more than a quiet child wrapped in a threadbare cloak, a boy left behind by a woman who did not stay long enough for me to see her eyes. You might think abandonment leaves an open wound, but for me, it became a kind of steel. In a place where monsters howled outside the walls, and even harsher beasts waited inside, sentiment was the first luxury I learned to kill. The Witchers didn't promise comfort, they promised survival, and even that came at a price only the foolish were willing to pay. I wasn't foolish, just small, just silent, just ready to follow the only path left for me. Kaer Morhen accepted me the way a blade accepts a hammer's strike, violently, relentlessly, and without apology. Each dawn, I woke to lessons meant to break bones or sharpen instincts, and very often they did both. Those days forged my body, the nights forged everything else. I learned to trust no sound, especially the soft ones. The trials began long before the true mutations, long before the poisons and the alchemy that would twist my blood into something no longer human. As a child, I ran obstacle courses built to fracture legs, crossed wooden beams slick with frost, parried swinging blades meant to teach me where not to stand. Vesemir watched with the patience of a man who had buried far too many students. He never told us to succeed, he told us to survive. And I did, though survival often felt like little more than luck dressed in bruises. If you had been there watching me stagger through those trials, you might have wondered why I kept going. I didn't know then. Maybe I still don't. Perhaps a child abandoned once refuses to be abandoned again by death. When the real trial came, the one that strips a boy's humanity until only reflex remains, I walked toward it the way a prisoner walks toward judgment. The alchemical brew stung my veins like fire made liquid, tore strength apart just to rebuild it into something sharper. I remember screaming until my voice cracked. I remember others screaming too, until the screaming stopped altogether. Only a few of us rose again with pupils that thinned like a wolf's and senses that reached further than any human's hope. The changes carved away everything soft inside me, left me colder, faster, harder to kill. Some claim the trial destroys the heart. They're wrong. It simply teaches the heart to beat without warmth. And yet, if you had seen me then shivering on the stone table, gasping for breath, you might have guessed that the transformation was less a gift and more a sentence. When I finally stood, the world rushed at me in colors and sounds I had never noticed before. I heard snow shift beneath the paws of a fox half a field away. I smelled steel from blades untouched since morning drills. I felt danger in the air like a second heartbeat. Vesemir placed the medallion of the wolf around my neck, its silver form cold as truth. In that moment, I understood what I had become. Not quite man, not quite monster, but something built to stand between the two. I didn't thank him. Gratitude was foreign to us. Instead, I bowed my head once, an acknowledgement between predators who had both survived long enough to recognize endurance in another. After the ceremony, I walked alone across the courtyard, listening to the world hum with a clarity that frightened me more than any beast. Children rarely grasp destiny, but I felt its weight even then. You standing before me now might imagine triumph in that moment, the birth of the so-called White Wolf, but triumph has no place in the making of a Witcher. What I felt was the quiet truth that everything ahead from my first contract to the last breath I will ever take was already set into motion the day my mother left me in the snow. Kaer Morhen didn't give me a new life. It reforged the broken one I arrived with. And as I stepped into the wind with my new senses, new strength, and new emptiness, I understood the first rule of my path. A Witcher is not born, he is carved. I walked into Blaviken with the corpse of a Kikimora tied behind my horse, certain the sight of it would earn me a fair reward. Instead, the townsfolk stared as if I were dragging a curse into their market square. You would have felt it too, that shift in the air when people decide you are something less than human. A Witcher brings safety, yet fear always comes first. When I stepped into the tavern, the whispers thickened like smoke. A young woman named Renfrey watched me with eyes that carried too much history for someone her age, and before I could untangle her intentions, the mage Striga pulled me into his web of prophecy and paranoia. He spoke of the curse of the black sun, of girls born under an eclipse who would grow into harbingers of misfortune. He claimed Renfri was one of them, a danger so great that killing her would be an act of mercy. His voice echoed with certainty, but certainty is a fragile thing in a world built on fear. I refused to be his executioner. If you had stood beside me, you would have seen how quickly a choice poisons both paths before you. Renfri found me afterward, not with steel, but with a story of betrayal, cruelty, and survival that would have cracked softer men. She told me how Stregabor's hunters had harmed her, how she had fought her way free, how every step of her life had been shaped by the mage's conviction that she should never have been born. I listened, knowing both sides carried truths sharpened into weapons. She asked me to kill him. I told her I wouldn't choose. She called my neutrality a shield for cowards, and perhaps she was right, but I had seen too much blood spilled by people convinced they alone understood destiny. I would not add her to that list. Night fell, but decisions don't sleep. Renfri's anger simmered into resolve, and the next morning, she planned to draw Stregobor out by threatening the townsfolk. When dawn broke, the market square filled with the scent of fruit and fear. I felt her presence before I saw her calm, steady, resigned. She stepped toward her men, and in her eyes I saw a plea she never spoke out loud. Walk away, or stop me. Fate rarely leaves room for a third option. Steel answered where words failed. Her men attacked, and the fight unfolded with the merciless clarity only battle brings. Each strike, each parry, each movement was a reminder that violence always exacts its price, even when you act to protect. When I reached her, she was already stained by the path she had chosen. She fought like someone who no longer cared whether she lived. I tried to disarm her. She forced my hand. When she fell, the world seemed to hold its breath. If you had been there, watching her lie still in my arms, you might have wondered how a monster slayer ends up killing someone who felt more human than many I have met. Stregobor emerged at last, triumphant in the way only a man untouched by consequence can be. He wanted her body for his studies, hungry to prove his theories. I stood in his way. There are lines even witchers draw, and he found one that morning. The crowd that had watched the battle saw only blood on my blade and bodies at my feet. They didn't care about prophecies or moral riddles. They cared only about the dead lying in their marketplace. To them, I was not a protector but a butcher, and so the name followed me as I left Blaviken behind. The Butcher of Blaviken. A title born not of malice, but of a moment where all choices led to tragedy. If you hear the name spoken with fear, remember this. Sometimes the cost of stopping a greater disaster is being mistaken for the cause of it. I carried that lesson from the village, heavier than the sword at my back. I had saved lives, but lost the right to walk their streets without hatred nipping at my heels. You, standing before me now, might think a witcher grows used to judgment. We do not. We endure it the way we endure winter because there is no other choice. I left Blaviken with the sun rising behind me, the world quiet except for my own thoughts. Destiny doesn't ask whether you want the burden. It simply hands it to you and waits to see if you break. I did not break that day. But as the road stretched forward, I understood something with a clarity sharper than any blade. Sometimes doing the right thing means walking away alone, with only your conscience to remind you why the blood on your hands was shed at all. I arrived in Temeria under a sky the color of old steel, the kind that warns you a storm is coming even when the air stays still. News of a creature tearing through miners had spread faster than truth usually does, and by the time I reached the outskirts, fear had already rooted itself deep in the soil. As I walked past shuttered windows and trembling voices, I could feel the shape of the mystery long before I saw its shadow. You would have felt it too, that tension that clings to a place cursed by secrets. When Triss Marigold approached me in the darkened courtyard of Vizima, the flicker of torchlight caught the worry hiding behind her confidence. A sorceress rarely shows fear, which meant this matter was far from ordinary. She told me about the tomb, about the bodies torn apart as if mourning had turned to hunger, and about King Foltest's refusal to let anyone near the resting place of his sister Ada. Her voice lowered when she confessed what she suspected. The creature haunting Temeria was no mindless beast, but a Striga born of a curse that clung to the dead princess and the unborn child she carried to her grave. Foltest wanted the monster cured, not killed. but kings often want miracles wrapped neatly inside moral absolution. I knew better. Curses are forged from human sins, and sins rarely vanish cleanly. Still, I accepted the task, though the weight of it settled heavily on my shoulders. If you had stood beside me at the mouth of that crypt, the stale breath of the tomb would have told you the same truth it told me. Whatever waited inside was not ready to return to anything resembling peace. Inside the chamber, the stench of decay mixed with something sharper, almost metallic, as if the air had memorized every violent act committed there. My eyes adjusted to the gloom, and claw marks across stone pillars told me more than any witness could. This creature was strong, fast, and far more intelligent than people assumed. I examined the bodies, noting patterns, the precision of the wounds, the way the torsos had been opened. This was not hunger. This was anguish shaped into violence. Curses often echo the emotion that birthed them. I understood then that the princess's death had left behind something far more complicated than a monster. Triss joined me as I unearthed the deeper truth. The curse was tied to betrayal, to forbidden love, to guilt that had rotted long before Ada did. King Foltest, for all his authority, was a man capable of mistakes like any other. And one mistake had grown into a Striga that haunted his kingdom. When we presented our findings to him, his anger erupted first. Denial is easier than remorse, especially for rulers. But beneath it, I saw a father desperate for redemption. He wanted Ada back, the child she might have raised, the life he believed he had been denied. Even a king is helpless when the past reaches out with claws. Night cloaked the castle ruins when I returned alone, the tomb yawning open like a wound. To break the curse, I had to keep the Striga outside her sarcophagus until dawn, a task that demanded equal parts strength, patience, and a willingness to face teeth sharp enough to peel flesh from bone. I waited in silence until the creature surged out from the darkness, all fury and instinct twisted into a form that still carried echoes of the princess she once was. She lunged, and I met her with steel only to deflect, never to kill. The battle was a dance carved from desperation. Each blow she delivered reminded me how thin the line was between salvation and slaughter. Dawn crept closer as the Striga's rage intensified. Her claws tore grooves into stone pillars. Her scream rattled through my chest. But I held her off, retreating only when absolutely necessary. When she tried to flee back into the tomb, I blocked her path with every ounce of strength I had left. The sun's first light spilled across the ruins as she collapsed, her monstrous form unraveling into the fragile body of a young woman. Ada, reborn, gasping, crying, alive. Watching her shiver in the light, I felt a rare flicker of relief, the kind that reminds me why I take these contracts even when they come wrapped in sorrow. Foltest greeted her awakening with a tremor in his voice he tried to hide, and though he thanked me, the atmosphere carried a heaviness that no gratitude could lift. Curses break, but the truths behind them linger. You might assume the end of the Striga meant peace for Temeria, but peace built on forgotten sins rarely stands long. As I left the castle, I looked back once, seeing the king kneeling beside the daughter he had almost destroyed. In that moment, I realized that monsters are not always the ones we hunt in the dark. Sometimes they are born from silence, from choices made in secret, from grief no blade can ever cut cleanly. I walked away with another reminder etched into my memory. Lifting a curse is never the hardest part. It's convincing people to face the truth that summoned it in the first place. I met destiny long before I understood its shape. It slipped into my life the same way most trouble does, quietly, almost politely, until it wrapped itself around every step I took. When Jaskier began following me from village to village, singing about monsters I had barely killed and embellishing the ones I had, I thought the only thread he would ever tie to my life was annoyance. Yet even annoyance has a way of steering paths you never meant to walk. His songs softened my name in taverns where people once spat at the sight of a witcher. They turned my scars into legend, my silence into mystery, and my profession into something almost heroic in the eyes of strangers. He believed stories could rewrite the world. I didn't believe him then, but the world has a way of proving bards right at the most inconvenient moments. The night we arrived in Cintra, the air felt charged with the kind of tension that makes even a seasoned witcher tighten his grip on the hilt of his sword. The castle gates shone under lamplight, and the sounds of celebration spilled into the streets. Queen Calanthe had summoned suitors from across the continent, each arriving with armor polished to a mirror's shine and confidence thick enough to choke a dragon. Jaskier, naturally, was delighted. I was merely tired. Court politics were never meant for someone like me. Yet you would have felt it too, the invisible pull, the whisper that something awaited me inside those stone walls. Destiny rarely announces itself with subtlety. Calanthe greeted me not with courtesy but calculation. She studied me as if she were weighing the value of my heartbeat. A queen like her didn't rise by chance. She rose by seeing the truth in every person who tried to hide it. Still, she granted me a place of honor at the feast, perhaps out of curiosity, or perhaps because kings and queens enjoy placing wolves among peacocks. The hall roared with music, wine, and the clashing egos of men desperate to win Princess Pavetta's hand. I watched them posture and preen, confident that none of it concerned me. Then a knight wrapped in iron, face hidden behind a helmet carved like a hedgehog, strode into the hall. Laughter rippled across the room, followed swiftly by outrage. But he stood firm, declaring not only his right to court Pavetta, but his claim invoked through the ancient law of surprise. If you had been beside me, you would have felt the shift in the hall, a tension sharper than any blade. Calanthe's temper cracked like a whip. She wanted him dead. It would have been easy to obey. One swing of a sword can silence any inconvenient truth. But when he removed his helmet, revealing the curse that twisted his features, I saw a man fighting not for power but for love. Steel flashed, words were shouted, and the hall dissolved into chaos. My instincts took over. I stepped between the queen's men and the cursed knight, not to shield him, but to shield the choice. Pavetta suddenly revealed the choice she had already made. Her love for him burst forth not as a confession, but as raw, unrestrained power. The wind screamed around us, knocking armored men to the floor, sending goblets and banners flying. Magic like hers does not grow quietly. It erupts, carving through the world like truth freed from chains. Calanthe, seeing her daughter's heart laid bare, allowed the storm to pass. I watched the lovers embrace when the magic finally calmed. The curse broke. Their faces softened into something almost ordinary. Gratitude filled the hall, and despite everything, they turned to me. They insisted on rewarding me for my help. I wanted nothing. But the law of surprise has a habit of slipping into your life even when you try to shut every door it can walk through. So I accepted. Not land, not gold, just whatever the knight had yet to know he possessed. The moment Pavetta staggered, clutching her stomach with a look that held both fear and joy, the court fell silent. And I understood. My reward was the child she carried, a destiny woven long before I stepped foot in Cintra. I didn't want it. I didn't believe in it. But destiny is indifferent to belief. It ties knots where it pleases. When I left the castle that night, the wind carried whispers that would follow me for years. Witcher, guardian, father by fate. I walked away from it, hoping distance could sever the thread binding me to a child not yet born. But destiny does not fray. It waits. It circles back. And you standing here before me now can trace every step I have taken since that night back to a single truth I once tried to ignore. The law of surprise did not give me a burden. It gave me a purpose disguised as a child's heartbeat, a thread I would spend my life following whether I wanted to or not. I had crossed countless valleys and battled creatures that bend the spine of any ordinary man, yet none of that prepared me for the chaos that began with a simple clay jar and a bard too curious for his own survival. Jaskier had insisted on fishing for inspiration in a river outside Rinde, humming half-formed verses while poking at relics buried beneath the mud. When he cracked open an ancient seal with the confidence of someone who has never tasted real danger, he released a djinn whose presence tore through the air like a blade dipped in stormlight. The creature's power coiled around us before I could react, and Jaskier, foolish as ever, became its first victim. His voice, the one he clung to more dearly than his own dignity, dissolved into a choking silence as the djinn's curse gripped his throat. If you had been there, you would have seen how quickly laughter drains from a man when breath becomes a luxury. I carried him to Rinda, searching for anyone capable of healing what human hands could not touch. That was when I first heard her name whispered with equal parts awe and fear. Yennefer of Vengerberg. She lived within the mayor's manor, bending the city's politics to her will with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. When I pushed through the manor doors, exhaustion dragging at every step, she regarded me with an expression that mixed curiosity with calculation. Her beauty was the sort that blinds before it warms, sculpted through fire and sacrifice, and her power filled the room like a second presence. She examined Jaskier with a flick of her fingers, diagnosing his condition not with sympathy but with hunger for the djinn that had caused it. She offered to help him, but every favor from a sorceress comes with threads attached, threads that can tighten into chains before you realize you've been bound. Her plan was simple: heal the bard, bind the djinn. She needed someone strong enough to catch its attention, someone foolish enough to stand between chaos and her ambition. Fate, it seemed, was amused, because I fit both requirements perfectly. As she performed her healing, she masked her intent beneath a veneer of professionalism, yet I felt the truth humming beneath her words. Yennefer did not want to save Jaskier. She wanted the djinn, its power, its freedom. I should have walked away. Instead, I stayed. Later that night, after Jaskier had recovered enough to complain again, Yennefer lured the djinn into a trap woven with spells as delicate as spider silk. I felt the pull of its presence long before I saw its form. She intended to capture it, to command it, to rewrite the destiny she believed had been stolen from her long before she ever learned a spell. Yennefer's life had been carved by cruelty, sold by her own family, reshaped through pain, and denied the one thing she wished for most: the chance to bear a child. To her, the djinn was not a danger, but a doorway to reclaiming what fate had stolen. But power that ancient does not bow easily. The djinn's force surged through the building, splintering beams, shattering stone, turning Yennefer's spells into dust. I fought through the collapsing manor to reach her, finding her standing in the eye of a storm she had summoned but could not control. Magic crackled around her, burning through the air like lightning trapped inside a cage. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw fear beneath their amethyst glow, not fear of death, but fear of being denied the life she wanted. The djinn's rage spiraled toward her, and I realized that the only way to save her was to bind myself to the creature through the final wish. My voice strained against the force, tearing through the room, as I spoke the words that tied her fate to mine. I cannot tell you the exact shape of that wish. Some things are meant to remain unspoken. But the moment it left my lips, the storm stilled. The djinn vanished. Yennefer collapsed into my arms, exhausted yet alive. When she woke, fury replaced gratitude. She accused me of chaining her to a destiny she had not chosen. And perhaps she was right. Our lives became tangled in ways neither of us fully understood. Even then, as she glared at me through strands of dark hair falling across her face, something unspoken grew between us, something sharp, something dangerous, something neither of us could walk away from. Later, when the room had quieted and the echoes of the djinn's rage faded, she looked at me not with anger but with a kind of resignation, as if she understood that destiny had touched us both with the same merciless hand. I felt the same truth. The night ended not with closure, but with a beginning one woven from fire, longing, and a wish that would follow us through every battlefield and every quiet moment afterward. If you stand before me now and ask whether the wish created our bond or merely revealed it, I cannot give you a clean answer. Some things in this world resist clarity. All I know is that from that night on, Yennefer was no longer just a sorceress I had crossed paths with. She became a thread in my life that no blade could sever, no matter how fiercely fate tried to pull us apart. War does not declare itself with trumpets. It creeps in quietly, settling between the stones long before the first soldier crosses a border. When I returned to Cintra seeking the child promised to me by the law of surprise, I expected resistance, but I did not expect the scent of fear already clinging to the corridors of the royal keep. Queen Calantha greeted me like an unwelcome omen, her pride wrapped around her like armor. She tried to send me away, tried to convince herself that destiny could be outwitted by defiance. But destiny has a longer memory than any monarch, and it was already circling the city like a hungry wolf. I felt it in every whispered corridor, every hurried step of the servants, every tremor beneath the stone floors. If you had stood beside me, you would have sensed it too, the heaviness that settles before a storm powerful enough to reshape kingdoms. I attempted reason, but Calanthe was a woman forged in battle, not in concession. She hid Ciri away, replacing her with another child, believing she could trick fate the way generals trick enemy scouts. When her deception was exposed, she locked me in a cell beneath the citadel, bars cold enough to echo her distrust. I waited in the dark, listening to the city breathe above me, knowing each breath might be its last. And then the first siege horn shattered the night. Nilfgaard had arrived, not with negotiation, but with fire. The walls trembled as their armies poured through the valley like a black tide. From my cell, I heard screams, the clash of steel, the desperate shouts of soldiers who had trained their entire lives, yet still found themselves unprepared for a force driven by unrelenting purpose. By the time I escaped, Cintra was already drowning beneath the weight of invasion. The castle burned, its towers collapsing in showers of sparks that turned the sky a deep, choking red. I searched the carnage for Ciri, for any sign that the child meant for me still breathed the same smoke-filled air. But war rarely grants mercy. I found only destruction, and the Queen's final command echoing faintly through the dying courtyard. "Find Geralt, he is your destiny." While I fought my way through the battleground, Ciri fled into the night, a lion cub cast into a world that had turned feral. I would later learn how she ran through the streets, her breath sharp with panic, her feet bleeding as she crossed fields littered with the fallen. She escaped Nilfgaardian soldiers more than once, slipping through their grasp like a whisper of smoke. Hunger bit at her, exhaustion gnawed at her, and loneliness pressed against her ribs like a tightening band. Yet she moved forward with the stubborn resilience of a child who refuses to die simply because death has been offered. In the forest, she met Dara, an elf boy whose quiet courage stood in stark contrast to the world tearing itself apart. He saved her more than once, guiding her through dangers that would have swallowed her whole. But even friendship cannot shield someone forever from the weight of destiny. The massacres she witnessed, the slain innocents, the blood soaking into the soil, these memories etched themselves onto her heart long before I could reach her. And as she wandered from refuge to refuge, hope fraying each time she trusted the wrong hands, the world shaped her into someone far stronger than any royal heir. I trailed her path days later, following rumors of a girl with ashen hair and eyes too old for her age. Every trail felt colder than the last. I crossed burned villages, toppled carts, abandoned camps where blankets still held traces of warmth. Nilfgaard hunted her with a desperation that chilled me, as if they, too, had begun to understand what she represented. They called her valuable. They called her a prize. They did not yet know that she was neither. She was a storm-gathering shape, and storms are not owned. When I finally found her, she was standing at the edge of a forest clearing, her clothes torn, her face streaked with dirt, but her eyes alive with something fierce and bright. She looked at me as if she had been waiting her entire life for that single moment. And when she ran into my arms, the weight of every choice I had made settled into place around us. I felt destiny tighten its grip not as a chain, but as a bond that had always been there, waiting for recognition. Cintra had fallen, its people scattered, its legacy smothered beneath ash, but the child of its bloodline, the last lion cub, had survived. And standing there with her pressed against me, trembling from the echoes of everything she had endured, I realized that destiny had not been pursuing me at all. It had been guiding me toward her, shaping every step, every battle, every loss, until we met like two halves of a story, finally aligning. From that moment, my path was no longer my own. It belonged to the girl I held, to the promise I had unknowingly accepted, to the future that waited just beyond the tree line where danger still lurked. And as we left the ruins of the world behind us, I understood one truth with absolute clarity. Cintra had fallen, but its legacy walked beside me. Small in stature, fierce in spirit, and destined to change the shape of the continent. I brought Ciri to Kaer Morhen, believing the old stones could shield her from the world long enough for her wounds to breathe. I was wrong. Safety is a myth whispered to children so they can fall asleep. Witchers know better. Still, as we passed through the gates, snow settling around her like cautious blessings, I hoped the keep would give her something close to peace. The others greeted her with raised brows and guarded curiosity. Witchers are not accustomed to guests, least of all young girls carrying legacies older than the mountains themselves. Yet something in her gaze, steady, unbroken, softened even the most weathered among us. If you had walked those halls with me, you would have seen how her presence filled the keep with a strange echo of life we did not realize we had lost. Training began slowly. I pushed her toward discipline, not danger. But she wanted more, wanted to bleed, wanted to test herself against horrors she had only glimpsed in nightmares. I saw the hunger in her, not for violence, but for control. A child who has lost everything does not fear pain. She fears weakness. I recognized that fear all too well. Still, I held her back, believing patience could protect her. And yet Kaer Morhen whispered truths I had not been ready to hear. It started with Eskel. He returned late from a hunt, bearing a wound that brushed off even our most potent balms. That night the air grew thick with the scent of decay, and Eskel, my brother in all but blood, transformed into something twisted by roots and shadow. I fought him beneath the rafters where we had trained as boys, each strike carving through memories I once believed indestructible. When my blade finally pierced his heart, silence swallowed the keep. Ciri watched from the balcony, her eyes wide, not with fear, but understanding. Kaer Morhen was no sanctuary. It was a crucible, and she had already stepped inside. Triss arrived not long after, summoned by desperation rather than diplomacy. She saw Ciri's raw potential before any of us dared to name it. Elder blood, words whispered in legends, feared by kings, hunted by mages. The kind of power that reshapes worlds, not with spells, but with possibility. When Triss examined the strange crystalline dust left behind by the mutated monsters that had begun appearing too frequently, she spoke with a tremor in her voice. These creatures were not natural. They were connected to Ciri, their emergence tied to her screams from the day Cintra fell, to the monolith shattered by her uncontrolled magic. Imagine standing across from a child who looks at you with complete trust, unaware that her blood carries storms capable of ripping open the fabric of the world. I felt the weight of it coil around my ribs. I had sworn to protect her, but how do you protect someone from themselves? Yet Ciri never flinched from the truth. She stepped toward it, asking questions with a steadiness that made even Triss pause. She wanted answers. She wanted control. Above all, she wanted to stop running. The others tested her with trials meant for witchers, not princesses. She rolled beneath swinging blades, leapt across collapsing beams, and clawed her way up wooden pillars slick with frost. Every fall carved bruises into her skin, every rise carved resolve into her bones. Even Lambert, whose tongue is sharper than any sword, fell silent the day she completed a gauntlet meant to break grown men. None of us said it aloud, but we saw it. Ciri did not bend. She transformed. But transformation invites danger. One night, as the fire dimmed and most of us slept, a creature of sinew and shadow tore its way into the keep, moving with a hunger that screamed of unnatural origin. It ignored the rest of us, lunging straight for Ciri. I intercepted it, blades flashing under torchlight, but even as its body dissolved into ash, dread coiled in my stomach. These monsters were hunting her. Not by chance, by design. Triss helped her dive into visions shaped by her bloodline, searching for the origin of the power pulsing beneath her skin. What she uncovered would have driven weaker souls to despair. Visions of worlds bleeding into one another, of voices calling her from across the void, of powers that were not meant for mortal hands. Elder blood does not grant gifts, it grants burdens carved into the bones of ancestry. The truth rippled through Kaer Morhen like a crack in the foundation. If the world learned what Ciri carried, if kings, mages, or Nilfgaard discovered the full extent of her abilities, they would tear apart continents to claim her. She was no longer a hidden princess or a frightened refugee. She was a beacon in a world of predators, a key to forces no one fully understood. I realized then that Kaer Morhen could not protect her. The keep had become a target, and the shadows gathering beyond its walls were not the kind that faded with dawn. Ciri's presence drew danger like a lodestone draws metal, but leaving her undefended was not an option. She was my destiny, not as a burden, but as an oath sealed long before either of us understood its meaning. As winter winds howled across the battlements, I stood beside her on the training ground, snow settling on her silver hair. She looked at me not as a child searching for guidance, but as someone ready to face the world, no matter how dark. And in that moment, I understood why fate had woven our paths together. Elder blood may have shaped her, but her choice would define her. Kaer Morhen had given her strength, but the world was coming for her. And when it did, I knew I would meet it blade in hand, standing between her and every shadow that dared to reach for her. I had believed Kaer Morhen had already shown me every shade of darkness the world could summon, yet the night Voleth Meir revealed her true face proved how foolish even a witcher can be. The Deathless Mother had slipped into our lives like a whisper carried by winter, feeding on pain, on fear, on the unspoken wounds we tried to bury. I should have sensed her long before she reached for Ciri, but even I underestimated how expertly old gods hide behind human sorrow. By the time her presence coiled around the keep, she had already found cracks in all of us, and Ciri, burdened with elder blood and grief, became the perfect vessel for the demon's return. The first sign came with silence, the kind that presses against the eardrums and steals warmth from the air. Ciri stood in the courtyard, staring at nothing, her breath fogging in the cold, her eyes hollow as if the world had slipped beyond her reach. In that emptiness, Voleth Meir threaded her way into the girl's mind, weaving dreams of a family restored, of a home rebuilt, of a life untouched by cruelty. Hope is the sweetest poison, and Ciri drank it because she had never been given the chance to taste anything sweeter. If you had stood beside me, you would have felt it too, the wrongness that pulsed around her like a heartbeat not her own. When the demon seized control, it happened with a swiftness that cut through the night like a scream. She slaughtered witchers before they even reached for their blades, moving with an elegance that belonged to something ancient and merciless. I fought my way toward her through shattered tables and burning torches, calling her name, desperate to reach the girl beneath the monster's shadow. But the eyes that met mine were not Ciri's. They belonged to a presence wearing her skin like borrowed armor. The guilt of every life lost in that hall carved itself into my ribs, a reminder that destiny's threads are not woven only with purpose, they are woven with consequences. Yennefer arrived in the midst of the chaos, her magic newly restored yet burning with a fragile edge. She looked at Ciri with a tenderness I had not seen in her since the first days we met, and in that tenderness I recognized her resolve. She offered herself, a vessel for the demon, a sacrifice not demanded by destiny but chosen by her own hand. I felt the decision cut through me, a blade of fear and admiration intertwined. I wanted to stop her, yet I knew that sometimes power is not the ability to fight but the willingness to yield. Yennefer whispered a spell, and Voleth Meir poured out of Ciri like smoke seeking a new fire. The demon latched onto Yennefer, twisting her features into shapes no mortal face should bear. But Ciri was free. Then the world split open, not metaphorically, literally. A monolith grown to life, stone grinding against stone, light ripping across the courtyard. Ciri, dazed and trembling, reached for me, but the force dragging at her pulled harder than either of us could resist. A heartbeat later, we stood on another world, one painted in ash skies and burning horizons, a land where wind howled like the final breath of dying gods. On that barren plain, spectral riders emerged from the mist, armor blackened by storms, skeletal steeds pounding across cracked earth, eyes like embers sunk in ancient hunger. The Wild Hunt. They did not hesitate. They called out to Ciri as if she belonged to them, as if she were a lost daughter returned to the fold. Hearing that name, Daughter of Chaos, spill from their voices ignited a fear no monster had ever stirred in me. They reached for her with promises of destiny twisted into chains. I stood between them and Ciri, blade raised. Though steel meant nothing to beings forged from visions and ruin, they advanced, unhurried, as though certain they would claim her, certain no force could keep her from them. Yet in the split second before their grasp closed, Ciri found her strength again. She drew in a breath that trembled with determination and focused her power not outward but inward. She opened a path home. The world tore itself apart. Light swallowed darkness. The barren plains vanished. And we were back in Kaer Morhen, the air thick with smoke and the aftertaste of magic. Yennefer collapsed, the demon's presence ripped from her. Her magic returned but shaken. Ciri leaned into me. Her body small, yet carrying the weight of futures worlds have not yet understood. In the days that followed, Vesemir tried to convince us to remain, to rebuild, to fortify the keep once more. But safety built on stillness is a lie, and fate encircling Ciri would never loosen its grip. Mages sought her, kings plotted. The Wild Hunt rode closer with every passing night. Staying would only draw fire to the last sanctuary witchers had. Protecting her meant moving, disappearing, becoming shadows beneath the stars. So I left Kaer Morhen with Ciri at my side and Yennefer walking beside us, her steps steady despite everything she had endured. The three of us, bound not by prophecy alone but by choice, a witcher, a sorceress, and a girl whose blood carried storms. I do not know where this path will end, but as long as destiny reaches for her, it will find me standing between them. Not because fate demands it, but because love, however fractured, builds stronger walls than fear ever could. The tale of Geralt, Yennefer, and Ciri is not just a story woven from monsters and magic. It is a chronicle of choices, sacrifices, and the quiet truths that shape who we become when the world demands more from us than we think we can give. I've walked you through storms that shattered kingdoms, through grief that hollowed hearts, and through moments where destiny felt less like a guiding hand and more like a blade pressed against the throat. Yet at every turn, this story reminds us that fate is not a prison. It is a thread, one we can weave into something stronger when we dare to stand beside those we love. Geralt's path was never about slaying beasts. It was about protecting a girl who carried the promise of change. Yennefer's journey was carved from pain and ambition, yet it led her to understand that power means nothing if it cannot be used to save someone who matters. And Ciri, the child of prophecy, proved that even in the darkest moments, hope can carve open a new path. Their journeys collide, fracture, heal, and intertwine, showing us that family is not born of blood alone, but of loyalty, trust, and the willingness to face the impossible together. Now it's your turn. You've walked through every chapter with me, felt the battles, the losses, the threads of destiny pulling tighter with each step. Tell me, what part of this story struck you the deepest? What would you have done in their place? And which moments of Geralt's path will stay with you long after the tale ends? Share your thoughts below. I'm listening, and so is the continent.